David said that he has very experienced therapists working in Delta Clinic. What he actually means is that he has very old therapists working in the Delta Clinic. So
the geriatrics.
All the geriatrics, okay? We are all geriatrics, but we look pediatrics. So look, it is actually a privilege of mine to be here at the Help University to be sharing this thing about bringing up resilient children and adolescents. So psychological resilience is the sort of in thing nowadays, and you cannot go past any journals of psychiatry or psychology or counseling without coming across that word psychological resilience. So everybody seems to be jumping on board with regards to psychological resilience. The other one is, of course, the word mindfulness. Everybody seems to be jumping on board with mindfulness. So this morning, I hope that I will be giving you a mindful teaching, and in return for my effort, I hope that I would have a mindful audience who are going to be mindfully receiving my mindful teaching for this mindful morning. So by way of introduction, basically, as David said, I'm a child psychiatrist. I have been in private practice now in Sydney for the last 28 years. And my philosophy in terms of my practice is that I like to empower young people. I like to see families coming together to support the young people. So apart from my clinical work in Sydney, the other thing that I've been doing is going overseas to be doing some teaching, and of course in Malaysia. And before this venue here, I was in Penang talking about school refusal. And before Christmas, I was actually in China giving some talks on family mental health. So apart from English, I am actually proficient in Mandarin as well. So if you see that I slip in one or two Chinese words, then you know why, because I might get a bit confused, because I get a bit excited with the teaching. So, and apart from my clinical work, I'm actually quite a bit into using modern day technology, the information technology, to share about my knowledge. So I've actually set up a website called Healthy Mind Concepts. For those of you who were here yesterday, you would have heard a bit about that. And for those of you who are new, I just want to give a very short introduction about healthymindconcepts.com. So it's concepts.com, there are many, many concepts. So basically in that website, I put together some free education material for parents and for the general public. Because whenever I see young people and families, and the next thing they ask is, where can I get some information? So I've written down some informations on depressions, anxiety, on ADHD. Now I do not profess that my website is exhaustive. So in other words, it's not the website that you go to and then you get the authority and everything on ADHD, but at least it gives you some pointers about eating disorders, about ADHD. And on the website as well, there are some, if you go into management tools, there are some simple toolkits which are for free on how to do relaxation, how to do breathing exercise, and how to have effective communications with your adolescents, children. So, and of course, there are some toolkits as well that I put together over the last 28 years of my clinical practice, having been trained in various disciplines of family therapy, individual therapy, CBT, and play therapy. So I have actually put together some of these things in the way of a toolkit for different disorders in order to help parents and my patients. So there's the anxiety toolkits for people who have anxiety problems, and depression toolkits and stress toolkits. The difference between the toolkits and some of the education material that you will find is that they're very simple. So the person actually doesn't have to go through 300 pages of talking and medical jargons and scientific jargons in order to learn something. It's very interactive. So this morning, for my sharing with you on bringing up children with resilient, psychologically resilient children and adolescents, I am actually basing my entire talk on my two kids. So when you look at the PowerPoint, at the bottom, it will tell you where the teaching is from. On the left-hand bottom of the PowerPoint, because I draw from various toolkits in order to present this talk to you. Now, as an important caveat, I just want to say that psychological resilience is the thing that parents are supposed to be doing with their kids on an ongoing basis. It's a bit like physical resilience, okay? How to be healthy. Now, you just don't teach your child to be physically healthy and resilient by telling your child not to eat ice cream and not too much sugar. It's an ongoing thing. So psychological resilience is an ongoing thing. And even if you understand everything that I have to say today in terms of the teaching, it doesn't mean that that is the encyclopedia that you have walked away with in terms of helping your child with psychological resilience. So in a nutshell, to be psychologically resilient is to be psychologically healthy. And just like to be physically healthy is a daily thing, it's an ongoing thing, and you build on it, and you build on it, and psychological resilience is the same thing. So in my talk with you, I will present to you 10 basic skills to be psychological resilience. And each of those skills is something that is to be expanded on, and for the parents is to teach their kids and to work together with their kids in order for the child to be psychological resilience. If you can just hold on a while, I just want to check that the recording is on. It is on. No, it is okay. I'm a bit paranoid, you know, because the other day I was doing teaching in Penang, and I thought that I turned on the thing, and then at the end of the teaching, then it wasn't even recorded one word, so I just get a bit paranoid. So when you're paranoid, then you have to check things from time to time, okay? So what is my diagnosis?
Perfectionism.
Perfectionism. Most doctors have OCD, actually. They teach you to be OCD, you know, in the doctors, because it's like you check your pill, you check your syringe, and then you check how many meals, then you get the nurse to check it, then after that you check it again, that you're actually giving penicillin, okay? So you do it 4 or 5 times, and after a while, then you just become OCD. So anyway, to start off with the definition of psychology, and so what we hope to achieve today, is obviously some understanding of young people. So I hope that at the end of the sessions, all of you would gain something in terms of understanding of the young person. And of course, some skills to help the young person. So if you are clinicians, I hope that you can actually walk away today knowing that, hey, look, you know, having paid that $100 ringgit or 170 or whatever, okay, with the early bird, which is more expensive than the late birds, that you actually walk away knowing that you have actually acquired some skills. And above all, right, you also have some skills to determine when the young person need a bit more, if you are the parents, need a bit more in the way of professional help. Because at the end of the day, none of us is expert in everything, even the professional people. So we do refer difficult cases to people who are more experts. So hopefully, out of today, then we have achieved that. So in terms of psychological resilience, what is the definition? Now, it is always good whenever we talk about something that we define something, because after we define that, then at least you and I, right, we have the same sort of language, even though we may have different paradigm, but at least, you know, we talk about the same thing. So if we're going to talk about apple, we don't talk about orange. So psychological resilience is actually the psychological ability of an individual to withstand the various challenges and trauma of life in such a way that the person would not develop a psychological disorder. So that's part 1 of psychological resilience, okay? So part 2 is that in the event of developing a psychological disorder, one is able to recover quickly without suffering further psychological problems. So the best way to be thinking about psychological resilience is to think about the rubber band. Okay? One of the big thing about the rubber band is that when you stretch the rubber band, it can stretch and stretch and stretch. And then when you release the stretching, the rubber band would actually comes back to the normal position. So when you think about the rubber band in a way, then you start to understand psychological resilience, that when a person has psychological resilience, you can stretch the person. And the person who has a greater psychological resilience than another person will be stretched a lot more. So a rubber band that is a lot more stretchable has more psychological resilience, okay? And when this rubber band, even if it's snapped, okay, then it doesn't actually take a lot of time to be restored to its original position. Now that is a very important concept of psychological resilience. So we are here today, this morning, to talk about this, to examine this, and to share together this topic of bringing up children and adolescents with great psychological resilience. It means that we are here in order to learn some skills so that our adolescent children, our adolescent patients, and our adolescent students, for some of you who are teachers, are become a bit more stretchable by the demands and the stresses and the life events of life. So within that concept then, when we think about psychological resilience, in a nutshell, then we think about stress and vulnerability, okay? The word down here is psychological resilience. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually come out very well. So you almost cannot talk about psychological resilience without in some way talking about stress, okay? Because when a person is being stretched, the person is actually undergoing stress. And interestingly, I like to share with you all that when it first started, the word stress was not a psychological word. The word stress was a scientific word. Scientists, they subject different metals such as iron and gold and tungsten under stretching force, and to see how much force it takes for the metal to snap. So it was a word borrowed from physical science. So you can't talk about psychological resilience without talking about stresses. They are linked together. And likewise, you can't talk about psychological resilience without talking about vulnerability. Vulnerability is that inbuilt thing, the inherent property of that person, which makes the person a bit more vulnerable. So for example, adolescents who come from a family with a prominent family history of mental health problems, such as if one or more of the parents have schizophrenia. So the person is more vulnerable to developing schizophrenia. So instead of 1%, the person has a lifetime prevalence of 10% developing schizophrenia. If one or more of the parents have a depression, especially a bipolar disorder, which is a type of depression, so the person again has an increased vulnerability of developing a bipolar disorder or depression. So when you think about psychological resilience, then you have to think about stress and you have to think about vulnerability. Now when you look at that balance, right, so when a person is more vulnerable to developing a psychological disorder, then in order to balance that so that the person will still be psychological resilience, then you have to look at the other side of stress. So a person who is more vulnerable, obviously, right, cannot withstand as much stress than a person who is less vulnerable. So then you may teach the person about stress management, for example. So if we can keep that in mind of that very fundamental thing of psychological resilience involving and interrelated to this whole concept of stress and this whole concept of vulnerability, then we are on the right path. So let's talk about a child's life. Let's put aside this whole thing about psychological resilience first and talk about a child's life, because you need to know what is happening in a child's life and the components of a child's life in order to talk about psychological resilience. So if I were to ask you the questions, when you think of a child, what do you think of? Now, in an Asian context, when we think of a child, a lot of times, we might think of the physical context, okay? But then in an Asian context, a lot of times, we would think very much about cognitive context as well as the academic. How many A's do you get? And are you in a selective school? Are you in a prestigious school, okay? And so that seems to be the concept of a lot of Asians. And as I've come across a joke that says, Asians are not Asians. So we need to get A's, okay? We don't get B's when you're Asians. We are not Asian, right? So a lot of parents then think of their kids as physical, cognitive, and academic. But a holistic child, okay, has many other domains in his life. It's not only the physical bit, but it's also the emotional bit and the social bit. Now, the social bit probably doesn't feature very well in an Asian context because, socialization is not so important than study. But socialization is very important. The way of socializations and the way to grow in that socialization with other people is actually part and parcel of EQ, emotional quotient, okay? And the emotional side of the child as well is a very important thing in terms of being healthy, understanding his own emotions, managing his own emotions, understanding the emotions of other people, meeting the needs of emotional needs of the other people, and matching his behavior according to the emotional status of another person. So these are all concepts of emotional intelligence. So I added there the spiritual bit as well because after all, none of us is just material and we are not just physical. There's a part of us that is less tangible and that is non-physical, which I call the spiritual. So once we grasp that, then we know that the idea of psychological resilience is that it is just not to be thinking about psychological resilience so that your child will become a better A students rather than a B students or A plus students rather than an A students. It is not just so that your child would be achieving academically. It is that your child would grow in that holistic way to be, I would say, a total person, okay? A person who is totally healthy. And by the same token, a child who has very low psychological resilience is not just going to have his emotional life affected, but eventually his other bits of his life as well, his academic life and his social life would also suffer. So try to transcend above that word psychological. So psychological resilience is not only important in terms of the psychological health, but it's actually in terms of the total health of a person. And for our context this morning is about young people. So let's talk a bit then about the child's achievement before entering into adulthood. Right, just very briefly, what I have to say to you will take a few more lectures to go in details. But the idea of parents bringing up children and also for professional people helping young people is so that the young people would achieve the different milestones. So before a person can enter into adulthood, right, there are a number of milestones the person needs to achieve. The first one is trust, learning to trust. That is something from the infancy. So initially the infant learns to trust mom and dad, that mom and dad are going to meet my needs, mom and dad are going to change the diaper, mom and dad are going to feed me when I'm hungry. And from that ability to trust, then the person can trust other people. Then as the child grows on to be a bit stronger and have control of his limbs and his sensations, then that goes to the stage of being a bit more autonomous. He starts to explore the environment. And then it goes on to having initiative to learn things. And hopefully, by the time the child goes into school, then there is the attitude and the ability for what we call industry, meaning working, okay? To know that, to work hard, to know that to work in order to achieve one's objectives and one's goals in life. And then it goes on, of course, in the way of adolescents, they have the ability to form an identity. And this is the time during adolescence when the person questions about family values, the person questions about the religious values of the family, questions the moral values, and questions the spiritual values of the family. All those things are very important for the young person to get to know who he is. And as a result of that, adolescence can be a time that is very, very tumultuous for some of them because they have to achieve so many tasks. And it takes a very well-informed and it takes a very well-meaning parent to support the young person because the person has to come to a stage of saying, these are my parents' values, this is how they've taught me, are they valid? This is what they believe in, and this is what I've been told for the last 17 years. Do I believe in that? Because that is very important for them to have a sense of who they are. So it's no longer the parents' values, it's no longer the parents' belief, but it belongs to them. And that forms their identity. And as a result of their own identity, they can go on to form intimate relationships with other people. And this is a time where adolescents then not only do they form very intense relationship a lot of times with their own gender, their best friends or whatever. This is all the times of idolizations where they have ideal and usually people of celebrity status in order to have a sense of their own kind, of their own self. And as a result of that, then they can go on to form intimate relationship with another person. So when an adolescent or young person have low psychological resilience, then that low psychological resilience will affect the achievement of the milestones. So you may have a young person, for example, who have a problem with industry. You have a young person who has a problem with identity because he doesn't know what he is. And you may have a person, right, with a low psychological resilience who cannot form intimate relationships with other people. So, as you can see, psychological resilience is absolutely important in the growth of a young person. So, in helping our young person, then we need to impart a concept for the young person that the young person does not actually live in the universe by himself. So, the circle there represents the thought life, the behavior of the person, and the emotional life. But the young person is actually impacted by life and by other people. And as a result of that, then the person, right, can have a choice of responding or reacting. Now, the more psychological resilient the person is, the less likely the person were to react. The more likely that the person is able to respond. Now, I want to make a distinction between responding and reacting. So reacting is kind of a reflex. So if you don't like me, then I'm going to punch you, If I have this problem, then I'm going to cut myself because, I can't have this intense emotion inside me. And if I feel like I'm down, then I eat compulsively. And if I have problems and I pick on another person, that is reacting. So the more psychological resilient the person is more likely to be able to respond. So in other words, I have this feeling inside me, I'm bored, I have this feeling inside me and I don't feel good. How do I respond to that rather than reaching for a cup of ice cream? And how do I respond to that rather than feeling that, oh, this is time to slash my wrist? So psychological resilience is able to help the person to respond to the external environment of what I call the normal life events in life. So the normal life events would be the normal transitions of going to school and meeting the demands of school, meeting the demands of socialization, and extraordinary life events such as losing a loved ones and having to contend with trauma in life, and then also dealing with people. So rather than reacting, then I'm able to respond to the external demand, to the external life environment, to the various vicissitudes of life and the demands and the actions of other people. So moving on then, in order to understand psychological resilience, and that slide is taken from my toolkit, Emotion Regulation Toolkit. Emotion regulation is another big word, okay? And in other words, how do you regulate your emotions? I'm not actually explaining things, right? Because I say emotional regulation means how to regulate your emotion. I'm just flipping the noun with the verb, okay? And so it's really to understand the interrelationships between emotions, thoughts, and behavior. Now I just want you to pause for a while and try to think about this simple concept. Now, if I flash it on the PowerPoint, you would say, of course, emotions is related to thoughts and related to behavior. But a lot of people don't actually know that, okay? And a lot of people don't actually know that in a very deep way. So it is not uncommon for you to find people who would say, I don't know why I behave like that. I don't know why I say it, To say something is a behavior. But why did I say it? I don't know. How do you feel? What were you thinking? And a person who is just reacting to the environment would say, I don't know, because he's reacting according to his impulse. So he has some impulse control problem. So concept number one is actually to know that there's a relationship between your feelings and your thoughts and your behavior. Now, once you grasp that, okay, then you would say, okay, if there's a relationship between my thoughts and my feeling and my behavior, now that is very profound thinking when you think about that, okay? It's not simplistic at all. So which also means that, right, if I have a problem in my emotional life domain, I can actually change my thinking. And it will impact on my emotions. Or if I have a problem with my emotional life, if I change my behavior, then it would also have an impact on my emotional life. So if you understand that, then you understand why psychologists and psychiatrists, we make life difficult for you guys, because when you go out there to make a survey, you would find that at this present moment, there are about 250 schools of counseling and psychotherapies. Okay, it's 250. I can name you a few, right? You have the exploratory therapy, like Freudian object relations, self-psychology, and the British object relations. Then you have the cognitive behavioral therapy. Then you have the mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy. Then you have the interpersonal therapy. Then you have Gestalt therapy. Then you have psychodrama. Then you have transactional analysis. Are you confused? Good if you are confused. I'm confused sometimes, okay? So what is basically is that a lot of therapy then focus on one, and then they put a name on that. So behavioral therapy concentrate on changing your behavior. Because the understanding is that if I change the behavior, then I would change the emotions and the thoughts. CBT says that let's forget about the emotion. Let's just think about the thoughts. Okay, so I'm going to teach you the right thinking. So because of that, then I call myself a CBT. So if I do something which is a bit more emotionally based, like a Gestalt therapy, okay? Let's talk about how you feel and what you do, right? I'm concentrating on the emotional domain. And all is it because that emotions and thoughts and behavior are all related. So once you grasp that, okay, which is a very basic thing, and the next thing, okay, to understand, and that slide is actually taken from Increasing Your Child's Psychological Resilience Toolkit, which I have online, okay? It's really to teach your child that, look, your psychological resilience, or you have to use your own words according to the level of understanding your child is. You can actually use the word emotionally strong, okay? So the emotional strength or the psychological strength of the person is inversely related to the stress. So the more, if you go the slide, okay, when you go up on a higher scale, so the higher psychological resilience I have, then I would feel less stressed about something. Okay, it's like a bit like the rubber band. Okay, if the rubber band, you might come across some rubber band that are already tight. You have to stretch, and then it will only stretch a bit. Okay, so same thing. If I'm psychologically resilient, then it takes a great deal, okay, of stress for me to feel it. So by the same token, when the psychological resilience is down, then it's more likely for me to feel stress. Again, simple concept, but you have to impart that to the kids, but you have to understand it first. So, let's then also go on to the third thing, okay? To tell our kids that at the end of the day, when our stress response and our relaxation response is a bit like a seesaw, okay? So when you see these kids on the seesaw, there's no way that the child can be down, there's no way that both kids can be down, and there's no way that both kids can be up at the same time. So stress and relaxation response in the body is the same thing, and that is in my stress and anxiety 2 kids. So when the stress is up, the relaxation response is down. When the relaxation is up, then the stress is down. So what do I do when I'm stressed? I have two choices in a way, okay? I can actually try to reduce the stress response, or I can actually increase the relaxation response. Very simple, but great day-to-day applications, okay? From the simple thing of teaching the child to do progressive muscular relaxation, meaning that let's divide our body into different parts, and I want you to tense it as much as possible, clench your fist until you can't clench anymore, and then release that, okay? As much as possible. Imagine that you are like the jelly, okay? That is progressive muscular relaxation, or teaching the child to do some breathing exercise. And the other one is guided imagery, right? Look, you are so stressed, okay? Before the exams, this is what I want to teach you to do, okay? Before you get in there to do your spelling bee, this is you talking, to your 5-year-old, okay? Before you go in there, okay? I just want you, when you're sitting there, before the teacher asks you and say, Abeng, it's your chance, it's your turn now to do, to recite the 20 new words like hippopotamus and rendezvous and, okay, difficult words. And I just want you to close your eyes and imagine that you are there at that time when Daddy and I will take you there to the nice beach in Paris. Well, it won't be in Paris because it's not by the sea, okay? Maybe in Sarawak, okay? And you feel really relaxed. Now what are you doing? You are merely doing, okay, a visualization based on a real life experience in order to elicit a relaxation response. So when you increase the relaxation response, then the child doesn't feel a stress. So some of these very basic things that you have to grasp, the interrelationship, the reciprocal relationship between relaxation and stress response. So a lot of our work then on psychological resilience is based on those 3 concepts that I've told you about, okay? The interrelationship between cognition, emotion, and behavior, and the issue of psychological resilience versus stress, and the reciprocal relationship, the inverse relationship, between stress and relaxation. So now that you grasp that, it actually improves your parenting by 50%, I hope. Okay, and you feel a bit more relaxed now, okay? And you can take in a bit more. So I'm going to talk about the 10th skill, okay? And this is taken from the Stress Toolkit. The very, very basic thing, okay? Skill number 1 is to teach our students, is to teach our young patient, okay? Is to teach our kids stress management, okay? Stress management. And with the stress management, it's important to sort of realize that for all of us, okay, we are like this person, okay? We are trying to walk across the rope of life without falling in and being taken in by the sharks, okay? So on the one hand, we have to balance life events, as I mentioned before, things that may be normal, okay? For example, normal life event for a child to go from primary school to secondary school, a life event for a late adolescents to go into a university from high school, and normal life events for our Beng, okay, that who instead of going into to study medicine, then he can only go into doing law, right? Asian parents usually like their kids to be either doctors or lawyers, right? So it's a life event, okay? So it's a balancing of life events and his own vulnerability, and hopefully then he can walk across. So that is a very basic concept of stress management. So skill number one is really to teach our child the right way of stress management. So this is a summary slide from the stress toolkits, right? So some of the important stress management skill that we can teach our kids is to send them to Langkawi for holidays, okay, with a coconut. No, it is actually to teach them about relaxation and guided imagery, okay? And as though they are sitting under the coconut tree. I actually took that, I think, when I was in Langkawi, okay? So it's a nice coconut tree, and teach them about that, okay? So very simple, relaxation, okay, meditation, and guided imagery. And go on, for young kids, right, I find that, again, these two slides are taken from the stress toolkits, right? Young people, the younger the person is, right, the more they are able to use some guided imagery, okay, in order to deal with their stress. So in the stress toolkits, I talk about why don't you just visualize that your stress is like a little pea, okay, a green pea. In Australia, a lot of young people don't like to eat peas, you know. If you serve peas, then a lot of Aussie kids, they leave it behind, they eat the roast meat and the potato, but not the green peas, okay? Imagine that the stress, okay, is like a peas. You put it into the freezer, you freeze it, okay, and then you stomp on it, okay, and you squash it. Now, very simple, right? It actually works with the kids, you know. Or imagine that, you know, you have this stress monster, and you just lock it up, and you just buy a one-way ticket, send it off to the moon, and say bye to that, okay, and then helping the child to build in some leisure in their life. Now that is very important, okay? I think a lot of times too, okay, I think our Asian culture is that we are not very good with leisure, okay? We feel guilty, you know? When I talk about, sometimes in fact, in Sydney, I see a lot of Asian clients as well, not by choice because I speak Mandarin, and then I also speak Cantonese very proficiently. So it is hard when I say, look, this is what I want you to do, okay? I just want you to go to the cafe, right? I just want you to order a cup of cappuccino. I just want you to sit there, okay? And I just want you to take a sip of the cappuccino, right? And I just want you to savor that, you know, in your mouth and feel the texture of the cappuccino, right? And maybe you can smell it at the same time, okay? And just, you know, just relax, okay? Just don't gobble it down, okay? And just, you know, just do that pleasure thing, you know? Take a walk along the beach, okay? And feel that, you know, the pleasure of the sunshine falling on your shoulder, okay? It's a setting sun, so it's not too hot. And then you can feel the wave coming in, okay, as you get nearer to the side of the seashore. And then you can feel the wave as it contacts your skin of your feet. It actually takes away, okay, the stress that you have. And just enjoy the pleasure. What I've done with you is just some visualization, okay? If you follow me, then you would have done a bit of visualization of a bit to have pleasure in life. But you didn't follow me, then you would have thought, please get on with it, okay? And then you would have lost the moment. So teaching our kids to have some pleasure, to have some hobbies, okay? It's a stress management. And then learning to prioritize their life. I call that the life pizza. I don't know what you call it here in Malaysia. Maybe if I were to rewrite the toolkit for the Malaysian context, I have to say the life pizza with the durian flavor. And so life is a bit like the life pizza, okay? There's only too many pieces, so many pieces that you can cut. All of us have a life pizza. Your child has a live pizza. Kids do very well with this, you know. And now in the toolkit, then it says, let's slice this, okay? And according to what you want. And now let's put, you know, what you're going to do with those slices. How much time you're going to put on sports. How much time you're going to put on leisure. And study and work and family time. And your projects and your hobbies, okay? So that is time management and life management, okay? Very simple concept. Unfortunately, some of us adults, we don't do it well too, you know. Some of us, our live pizza with a durian flavor probably have 98% work, okay? And only 10% pleasure, sports, or whatever, okay? So helping them to learn to prioritize is a very important skill. But unless we have it, our kids are not going to have it. Then we also teach them, okay, in terms of stress management, which again is in the toolkit, very simple sort of CBT concepts, okay, of what we will call unhelpful cognitive style, okay? So again, psychiatrists and psychologists, we are like lawyers, we like to stump you with very difficult words. I have to apologize for my fellow colleagues, okay? You are psychiatrists or psychologists, but if I'm not speaking to you, you are not. We like to stump you, you know? When we say negative cognitive style, it just means that you tend to think negatively, okay? But it's too difficult for us to say, well, you think too negatively, you know? We have to say, you have negative cognitive style, you know? What do you mean by that, Doc? Okay, I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes trying to explain to you. So, negative cognitive style, very basic for kids, right? A storm in a teacup, okay? Meaning that it is only a small matter, okay? And when I think that this is a big matter, I'm going to be stressful, okay? I'm going to feel stressed. Okay, you get a B, okay? And you cry about it. Hopefully, the parents don't cry about it, okay? And you cry about it. It's a storm in a teacup. Why? Because this test is not going to feature in your final exams, right? It's not going to feature in your final exams. It's not going to affect you, you know, at the end of the year, the report card, okay? The storm in a teacup thinking. And the other one, which I put in the stress toolkit, is the bad wizard thinking, okay? The poor me thinking. So bad wizard thinking are those people with the negative cognitive styles of turning everything into negative. It's a bit like, oh, you've done very well, you know? Yes, I know. And it's just luck, you know? That is a bad wizard thinking, right? It's not like, yes, I've done very well. I study for it and I deserve it. It's not luck, okay? And that is bad wizard thinking. So teaching your kids in the toolkit, I have a number of cognitive styles that is very common with kids, okay? And teaching them how to correct that. So that is very basic. Skill number one, stress management. Then skill number two, okay, is emotion regulation. And this is from my toolkit, emotion regulation toolkit, right? So these days, we are very good with emoji, okay? And sometimes when I write to my friend, interestingly, I think a lot of us, you know, who are a bit older, you know, we have all this WhatsApp group, you know, you get found by your classmates that you haven't met, you know, for 15 years, and all of a sudden, you know, they have this WhatsApp, you know, MGS girls group or something, you know. I have a few of them, okay? And you find, you know, middle-aged people doing that, right? And the middle-aged people actually are better at using emoji than the young people, okay? Everything is an emoji, has to, you know, finish off with the emoji. It's very good, then you have a big smile, you know. Oh, that is terrible, then you have the emoji, okay, of that frowning face. And emotion regulations is very important. So in the toolkit, I do something like the emoji, okay? How many emotions can you recognize? Now, very simple, right? But you'll be surprised, and if you reflect about yourself, then a lot of us are not actually that emotionally attuned, okay? A lot of us are not really that emotionally attuned. Now, I can say this, okay? What I have to say, the next thing is not about women, but it's about men, okay? Now I can say this because I'm a man, okay? And because I'm a man, what I have to say is not sexist, okay? If I'm a woman, then it'll be sexist, right? And a lot of men are not emotionally attuned. And a lot of us, I use the word us because I have to identify with you in order to be empathic. And, and a lot of us, right, men, okay, we mixed up the emotion of frustration with anger. That's why you find that, with anger management, if you go to an anger management group, right, probably 90% is angry men, okay? There are fewer angry women, okay, because they're more in touch, okay? For a lot of men, they're not really that emotionally attuned. When we are embarrassed, then we get angry. When we are stressed, then we get angry, When we get frustrated, then we get angry. Everything is angry, So you'll be surprised, okay, that a lot of us are not really that emotionally attuned. So when it comes to emotion regulations, again, this is taken from the toolkit. What is emotion regulations? The 3 steps of emotion regulations. The first one is to be aware. I just mentioned to you that a lot of people are not aware. Now, what I have to say now, okay, again, when I say this, I'm not going to be a racist, because what I have to say is about the big group of people group that I belong to, okay? I think by and large, because of our upbringing, Asian people are not as emotionally aware, okay, as Western people. Because it's just not in the culture. It's not in the culture to talk about how we feel, okay? In the Western culture, how you feel is very important, okay? So if you like to do an experiment, okay, get an air ticket and come to Sydney, right? And you go shopping, okay? Now, if that article is not right in an Asian context, okay, then you would just march up there and say, oh, this one, the button is lost and this sort of thing, okay? It won't get you anywhere. But then in a Western culture, you say that, look, I feel really disappointed that I spent $100 to get this jacket. And it is not the way that, I want it to be, and it is not the way that you advertise. I feel very disappointed with that. And they listen to you. Why? Because in the Western culture, emotions is very important. And in the Eastern culture, I dare to say that emotions are very important, because it's like, get on with it, So emotions regulations, the first thing, okay, is to help our kids to recognize emotions, okay? To be aware, like the magnifying glass, in the toolkit, you tap that, it will flip over and it will say recognizing. And the next thing, right, is to learn how to verbalize that. And again, in our Eastern culture, verbalizing is not important too. It's like, what is the point of telling you how I feel? You're not going to change the way how I feel about it, right? And that's the reason why a lot of time talking therapy, right, for those of you who are professional people, who know the struggle that you have, right, in doing talking therapy, okay? I come and see you, you charge me 300 ringgit, and it's not changing anything. I'm just telling you how I feel. And then you give me some advice. I can talk to my next door neighbor, My uncle could have said that to me, okay? And we don't value that. We don't value the idea of verbalizations, of making connections, of feeling understood, okay, by another person, of knowing that when I walk away, there's one person here who understands how I feel. And our kids, a lot of times, don't get that from us. And it's like, no, you didn't listen to me. You don't understand me, okay? So teaching them to verbalize and for us to really come alongside them to understand them is very important. And that is the reason why within an Asian context, okay? Within an Asian context, a lot of us Asians don't do very well with supporting another person who is going through grief and bereavement. We don't know what to do because it's like, oh yeah, husband passed away, or the wife passed away. I don't know what to do. He just talked to me, You don't do anything in grief counseling. You listen and you understand the sadness and the grief. That's all you have to do, okay? So understanding, verbalizing. And the third one is to manage that. So in terms of emotion regulations, to put it in a toolkit, okay? And a very simplified way of saying, what is emotion regulations? As I put in my toolkit, teaching your child how to recognize, verbalize, and manage the emotion, okay? Managing emotion can be quite complex, okay? And a lot of us don't do very well. So I've just given you, in a way, the kind of pointer. Now when I hit the next slide, hopefully some music is going to come on. I just want you to look at that and do nothing. How do you feel? What are you thinking? The bird talking to you. Oh, okay. Anybody else?
Birds are hungry.
The birds are hungry. Interpretation. Yeah, go on. I hope that it will stop. Pardon?
Wondering where the birds are.
Wondering where the birds are. Yeah, the thoughts. Yeah.
The bird sings loud.
The bird sings loud. Interpretation. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So I actually put that on, and in order to stress that the first step about emotion regulation is to teach or to acquire the skill of what we call emotion diffusion. Okay? Diffusion comes from the word diffuse. Now the problem why a lot of us have problems with our emotion regulations is that when we feel something, we get fused with that emotion. So when we feel sadness, we get ourselves embroiled in that sadness. When we feel angry, we get ourselves embroiled in that anger. And so that is taken from one of my series and also in emotion regulations called the Wait, Watch and Wonder. I put that as Wait, Watch and Wonder is because a lot of times when it comes to emotions, most of us, we react in a very impulsive way, okay? When I get angry, then I have to hit someone. When I get angry, I have to yell. When I feel sad, then I have to slash my wrist. When I feel bored, sorry, I just have to go on, but I'm not talking about this yet. So when I feel bored, okay, then, I have to eat a tub of ice cream. So the first step is what we call emotion diffusion. So in other words, my ability to wait, watch, and wonder, I come out with that word. And so in other words, I'm just going to stand back a bit, okay? Stand back a bit and to recognize that I'm feeling a bit sad. I have to stand back a bit, okay? And knowing that I'm feeling a bit embarrassed. And stand back a bit and knowing that I'm feeling a bit depressed. Without going into a reacting mode of like, these birds are busy, or these birds are nice, or these birds are a nuisance, okay? So in the toolkit then, I have put across something for the person, just look at it, listen to the birds, look at the roses, okay? And listen to it. That's called the Wait, Watch, and Wonder. And it does very well. You can do that with your kids without buying them, spending $10, okay, and buy the toolkit, okay? Go to the beach, okay? And go to a place where there's activities, okay? And it doesn't have to be quiet activities, right? It's not a kind of a relaxation thing, meditation. It is Wait, Watch, and Wonder, okay? Just sit by the beach, look at the sunset, okay? And sit by the river and looking at the flowing stream. And so helping the child to have that ability of emotional diffusion. So once I achieve that ability not to be fused with my emotions, then I can choose to respond to my emotion. Because once I get fused with my emotion, like this thing, for example, birds are really nuisance, and why are the roses white and not red, and this is quite boring. Okay, I fuse with it, then I'm more likely to react impulsively. So once I'm able to do that, then I can actually go on to the next skill of dealing with distressing emotions, okay? And that is from the toolkit, Distressing Emotions Toolkit. So life is such that there's a lot of things that distress us. There's no one disorder that I know of without involving some kind of distressing emotions, okay? So, for example, if I'm depressed, the distressing emotions is sadness and guilt. If I am anxious, the distressing emotions is fear and not knowing of uncertainty and unpredictability. If I'm grief, the emotion is an emotion of loss, okay? So all psychological disorders involve some kind of distressing emotions. And even if I don't have a psychological disorders, or your kids don't have a psychological disorders, on a daily basis, there's distressing emotions. I go to school and my best friend is not there. And I go to school, I'm supposed to be joining the usual group at lunchtime, and they disappear. And I'm supposed to be here to wait for mom and dad to come and pick me, and they're not there. The distressing emotions that I put so much effort into my maths, and I cannot still beat that girl over there, and she's coming top all the time, and I have to be second. That's distressing emotions. So how to deal with distressing emotions? And that is very important. Most of us use distractions, right, which is very basic. But the one thing that we must not do, okay, is to deny our distressing emotions. Because when you deny it, it's going to come back, okay? But in this toolkit, there are various ways of teaching the person how to deal with distressing emotions apart from distraction. So that is skill number 4. So skill number 5 is to help our kids to deal with their thought life, okay? And that is taken from Distressing Emotions and Emotion Regulation Toolkits. So again, if I can draw your attention back to that slide before, that emotions, behavior, and thoughts are all linked together. So most of the time, kids who have distressing emotions usually have distressing thoughts, okay? So if I have the distressing emotions of fear and anxiety, because I have thoughts of fear. If I have the distressing emotions of being depressed and sad, a lot of times because I have thoughts of loss, and that loss could be a real loss, such as, mom and dad separating and divorcing, or such as grandma passing away, which is real, or sometimes it's what we call a perceived loss, okay? I can feel depressed because I'm supposed to get an A+ in my piano exams and in my math exam, and now I get a B. That is not a real loss, it's a perceived loss because I expect myself to get that and I don't get that. So learning the child, teaching the child to deal with his thought life is absolutely important. And to link up, right, the notion that negative thoughts goes with negative emotions. And a lot of times, those of us who practice CBT will tell you that it's easier to help the person to change the thought pattern than to help the person and say, look, just feel differently, okay? So for example, if I can do an experiment with you, right? You seem to be a pretty happy bunch here. Otherwise you wouldn't be here, right? If I were to ask you and say, now go and feel sad. Go feel sad, okay? I want you to feel sad. What do you do? Most of us would try to think of a sad event. You change your thought life. You change your thoughts straight away. Because it is very hard to feel, okay, without thinking like that. So helping our children to deal with their thought life is the next thing to improve their psychological resilience. And especially dealing with negative thoughts. So we need to give our kids certain pointers okay, as in like the emotion regulation toolkit, okay? How do you deal with negative thoughts? Two things, okay, and very simple thing, and sometimes even adults find this helpful, okay? I usually tell my kids who come and see me, okay, who struggle with negative thoughts, right? I usually say, look, what I want you to do is this. I want you to remember that thoughts are not reality. Thoughts are not reality until I act on my thoughts, okay? So for example, for those of you who are single, I won't ask you which one to check whether you're eligible. And you can be dreaming all you like, okay, about marrying your Prince Charming, okay? Or you can dream about marrying a Snow White or a Cinderella, okay? That is a very exciting thought, okay? But it's not going to happen until you act on it, okay? Until, you dare enough, to dig out the phone number of that person or the email or the text or whatever and say, hey, look, can I go out with you and hang out over a cup of coffee, okay? You can think about her or him all you like. It's not going to happen until you act on your thought. Very simple principle, but a lot of us forget about that. But very powerful with kids. Thoughts are not reality until you act on it. So I know that you're anxious. I know that you're worried about mom and dad about this. I know that you're fearful about this, okay? It's not going to happen until you act on it. That's number one. Dealing with negative thoughts. The other one, which is very important, and this is very important even for adults as well, okay? Negative thoughts that lead to nowhere becomes rumination and automatic thoughts. How often we come across people who come and say to you, okay, to us as clinicians, or kids as well, I just can't get these thoughts out of my mind, okay? I know that it's nonsense. I think I'm going to fall sick, I'm not going to do well. I know that it's nonsense. I can't get it out of my mind. But if you get a detailed history, you would find that the person has been thinking about that thoughts for quite some time. So that negative thoughts then has a life of its own, and it becomes a rumination and becomes automatic thoughts. So skill number 2 that I usually teach, okay, adults and children alike, is thoughts have to lead to an answer, okay? Your negative thoughts, your worry have to lead to an answer. Even if the answer is to say, I'm going to think about it more tomorrow, that is an answer. Because if you're not, then you'll be thinking, I'm useless, life sucks, this is terrible, and I can't do anything about it, okay? So the thoughts have to lead to a solution. Even if the solution is a postponement, okay? So that is very important to extinguish the thoughts. And there are other ways to deal with negative thoughts as well, but those are 2 basic ones. And of course the third one with CBT is that let's look at how valid your thoughts is. So in a children's term, okay, the younger the child is, then we talk about thought detective, okay? I worry about this, I worry that when I go on the plane and it will be shot down by the terrorists, which is very common these days, right? I worry that when I go on the MRT is going to explode, okay? Okay, all right, let's be a thought detective and see how many times it has happened that the MRT got exploded. So you go into the sort of simple CBT, okay? So the 3 basic steps of dealing with negative thoughts. Then skill number 7 is to use what we call coping thoughts, right? To use coping thoughts. Because whenever a person feels that I cannot cope with this, then you are more likely, okay, to be depressed, to be upset, to be fearful, to be angry, to feel guilty, to feel shameful, right? So how do you teach your child to deal with coping thoughts? So this is where you get into the positive psychology, okay? Coping thoughts are usually thoughts that are able to say that this is situational. Yes, it is a terrible situation. Yes, I'm bullied at school. Yes, and I lost my best friend. Yes, there's this negative life event, okay? But this is not pervasive. It's not going to affect every area of my life. That doesn't mean that I'm useless, right? Yes, I fail my maths, but that doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It doesn't mean that I'm going to fail my English, I'm going to fail my PE, I'm going to fail my science. It is situational, right? I can cope with that because I failed because I didn't put enough effort. Okay, that is situational. And the next coping thoughts, okay, coping thoughts also have the characteristics that it's not persistent. Okay, so I failed my maths this time, I feel really sad. That's okay. Go on to feel sad about it. It is situational. Why do I fail it? Because I didn't put enough effort. I put too much emphasis on playing computer game, okay? It's not going to be persistent because for the next test, when I put in more time, I'm going to do well. So, coping thoughts have the characteristics that whatever negative things that I'm experiencing at the moment is situational. It's not pervasive or global. Whatever that I'm experiencing at the moment, yes, it's disastrous, it's negative, it's terrible, but it's not persistent. It's not going to happen again next year, or for that matter, it's not going to happen again next month. So we teach our children coping thoughts. And I hope that it may resonate a bit with us that sometimes adults too, we don't tend to go into that, okay, of that coping thoughts. I remember, this is years ago when I did my HSC in Australia. So in Australia, like Malaysia here, and even now, in order to get into med school, you need to have a very high aggregate score, okay? And the fact that I'm standing in front of you meant that I actually achieved that. And, but there was one test that I didn't do well in high school, okay? It was a bit like a trial exams, or a trial HSC. I still remember, I came back and I thought, oh, I'm a failure, you know? I'm not going to get into med school. It's terrible, you know? I come all the way to Australia and I'm a failure. I'm going to fail, you know? And I'm not going to go into a HSC. I wasn't using my coping thought then, okay? The right way of using coping thought is that I failed this time. I probably didn't study hard enough, you know? And, but it's not going to be persistent. It doesn't mean that I'm going to fail the next one because once I put some effort in, I'm going to be okay. But it doesn't mean that I can't get the marks to get into medicine, okay? So using coping thoughts are very important and sometimes that we have to teach our kids. And then skill number 8, okay? Skill number 8 is to teach our children what I call positive behavior, all right? Positive behavior, positive psychology, okay? And the 3 positive behavior that I stress, which I also teach people in mindfulness is, and this one is about behavior, okay? Let's practice the behavior of gratitude, of love, okay? Let's practice the behavior of joy. Let's practice the behavior of peace. So in other words, what is it today that I can do, okay, to express the positive behavior of love, of gratitude, you know, of saying thank you to mom, of saying thank you, you know, to someone who does something for me. Just practice that, okay? What is it today, you know, that I can do to pick up one life experience that I have and to tell myself, I'm going to behave joyful because of what has happened, okay? And what is it about today that I can do, or tomorrow, that I can practice the behavior of peace, okay? So when I say peace, I just don't mean like, okay? Peace means a sense of containment, okay? So how am I going to feel peaceful, okay, despite what has happened, okay? So that sort of feeling is a reaction. The sort of peace feeling is a response, okay? So that despite what happened, I want to practice the behavior of peace, of containment, knowing that I'm going to be okay, I'm going to feel calm, I'm going to behave calm, okay? And you can do that. You can do that with your kids. And I think some of us adults, we don't do that, right? You know, we get into strife and so, you know, we lack the behavior of gratitude and joy and peace. So practice that. You can do that with your kids, right? The younger they are, the better it is for you to do with them. If you have adolescent kids, don't, okay? They think, what's wrong with you, mom, you know? So do it, you know, start from young, the 5, 6 years old, right? We're just going to have a joy day, you know, today, okay? Let's try to have a joy day. Let's practice behavior of joy, okay? How are we going to express that to feel joyful? Today, we're just going to have a day of gratitude behavior, okay? How are we going to do that? So I'm going to do that, and I want to thank you that today, you've been very good, you've been very helpful to mom, I didn't ask you to tidy up your room, and I didn't have to shout at you. I thank you that you actually do it, okay? And then get the child to mirror it back, right? So because when he or she can practice positive behavior of that gratitude, of that joy, of that peace, he's just going to be a lot more psychologically resilient. And skill number 9, which is very important, I'm talking about parenting a bit here, okay? And clinicians can help our parents to do that, is to really adjust our parenting style to suit the kids. How often do we hear parents who come in here and say, come to your surgery, okay? And say, I have 3 kids. I always behave the same to them, bring it up the same way, all right? And this one is the one with the problem, okay? And he's the one, who is always depressed. I brought them up the same way, right? It's not like, I treat them differently. And I don't know why he's like this, His brother is okay, his sister is okay, but he's always depressed and doesn't apply himself, right? You know what the problem is? The problem is that the parents actually bring them up the same way, okay? Parents, right, we need to adjust our parenting style according to the kids. Let me give you an example, okay? If you have a very highly sensitive kid, you are more likely to have a kid that is highly anxious. Because a highly sensitive kid is like a sponge. So your kids will go through life, not only does he or she has to contend with his own or her emotions, he or she has to contend with the emotions of other people. So when he gets into the classroom, he absorbs the other 20 or 19 students' emotion, especially those who are naughty, okay? He feels really distressed because he's so highly sensitive, despite the fact that, despite the fact that he's very well behaved. Usually, highly sensitive kids are good kids. So you have a kid who goes through life, who has a lot of emotions that doesn't belong to him or her. If you are going to use the same way to bring up this kid is going to have mental health problems because you have not taught him or her how to protect himself or herself despite the sensitivity. For him or her to know that it is very good to be sensitive because you make a very good friend, you make a very loyal person, you understand people, okay? But let me teach you how to protect yourself so that you can understand other people without getting hurt. If you have a highly sensitive kids who are like a sponge for other people, and if you are the sort of parents to say that your parenting style is not to mollycoddle them, meaning that to wrap them up in cotton wool, and your style is I just throw them into the deep end. Because my eldest son did the same, we just dropped him at school, throw him into the swimming pool, and he cried a bit, he struggled a bit, and gulped a few gulps of chlorinated water, and then in 3 weeks' time he was paddling and he was swimming, and the same thing about the sister. So I'm just going to do this with this kid, okay? I'm just going to throw him in the deep end. He would drown. Why? Because he's a very sensitive kid. He's going to be traumatized, okay, by that abandonment, by your lack of sensitivity. So that kid cannot be thrown into the deep end. That kid has to go into a water of 2 inches deep to wet his feet and then go on, okay? So all of us, we need to adjust our parenting style. If you have a child who is very highly sensitive, your child most probably would already know about boundaries. So most of the time, highly sensitive kids don't need a lot of harsh discipline. Because if you're going to harshly discipline a highly sensitive kid, that child is just going to die. Because then he's just going to grow up, he or she is just going to grow up, okay, feeling that he's doing the wrong thing all the time. And he's going to struggle with guilt. And because of that, then one day he's just going to develop a depression. At 7 years old, 8 years old, because he assumes the feelings of all the other people. So adjusting our parenting style is very important, with love, with firmness, and also with emotional expressiveness to our kids. If you have a very highly sensitive kids again, right, you can't take it for granted that he knows that you love him or her. You actually have to say it. There's no such thing as, of course he would know lah. Why would I go and work so hard? You know how hard I work? Right? I have to do night shifts and all those things to send him to school. Of course he knows I love him, If you have a highly sensitive kids, you have to say that. You just can't use action to demonstrate that. You actually have to say that. You have to connect with the child. So we have to adjust our parenting style in order to help the kids to build the emotional resilience for the child, the psychological resilience. That one is actually taken from the emotional toolkits, where I get parents to rate their parenting. Then I also talk about their parenting style and how they can change their parenting style. So, what's that number 9? Adjusting. So, and then finally, coming to, these are the skills, and the microphone doesn't work. Right? Okay, it works now. So coming to this number 10, increasing your child's competence. The more competent I am, the more likely the microphone was incompetent. The more competent I am, the more likely that I'll be psychologically resilient. So parents, we have to learn to improve and to increase the competence of our kids. I've talked about recognizing our kids' personality. Now that is very, very important, okay? That is actually taken out of increasing your child's psychological resilience to kids. Parents, okay, we have to understand that in the new millennium, okay, when we bring up kids, gone are the days where you outsource preparing your kids psychologically. Most parents, we are very good at providing for our kids physically, academically, and some of us go on to providing for them emotionally, okay? And but we have to go on to be the life coach in order to help them with their psychological resilience. And the first step is to understand your child's personality, right? Now, I'm not saying that you should go online and then subscribe, pay $30 and get your child to answer 200 questionnaires and come out, with this list of things, okay? Which again, we are very good at doing about your child, neurotic index, and psychotic index, obsessionality index, And after you read through that, you think that your child has big problems, okay? And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that just learning, to have some basic tools about understanding your child. Is my child more likely to be the worried type? Is my child, the more expressive type? Is my child the type that is a bit more outgoing? Is my child the sort that when he or she has a distress, he externalizes it, which means he shows it, or is he more likely to internalize? So we have to learn to recognize our children's personality and dovetail our parenting in order to increase their competence. And then we have to provide the opportunity for learning for our kids. Now, I'm not even talking about maths and sciences and English and Shakespeare. We are all very good at doing that. Asian people are very good at doing that. I'm talking about the opportunity for learning, okay, and the opportunity to fail. When we give our kids opportunity to fail and the opportunity for learning and helping them and giving them the freedom to make decisions is very important. Why? Because if they are given the opportunities to make decisions, they can learn from that. That is number one. And number two is that when they are successful, then their self-esteem and their self-confidence will increase. Whereas, if you make all the decisions for them, That decisions belong to you and that success belongs to you. And in the future, they would have no reference altogether to make a decisions because they haven't come across that situation before. So we want to increase our children's competence by releasing to them the occasions and the opportunities for making decisions from the very simple thing, okay, to the very complex thing, right? From the very simple thing like you can choose whatever clothes you want to wear rather than, oh, I don't think this is good for you, why don't you go out and change, you know? We're talking about 18-year-old, you know? Do you think that you're good in the hairstyle? That's okay. Let him experiment with it, right? Provide the opportunity for learning. The opportunity to fail is very important, okay? Because people who are successful are usually people who have failed before. Most people who are very successful is because they have failed in the first attempt at something, or the second attempt, and they learn from that. And people who haven't failed, okay, do not know how to experiment and make decisions. And then we give non-critical feedback, recognize our kids' effort. And in order to recognize our kids' effort and feedback, we really need to learn about the strength of our kids, right? So in other words, where is my kid's strength? Because not every child has what we call scientific intelligence. And some of you would have come across that, okay? When we talk about intelligence in an Asian context, a lot of times, we talk about the scientific intelligence, you know? How good are you with maths? How good are you with the physics and the science and the biology? In fact, biology rank pretty low, you know? It's not kind of high power, okay? Are you doing pure maths or something, you know? In Australia, we have 4 unit maths. And, so, there are other types of intelligence. Okay? There's linguistic intelligence, right? Good with languages. There's the musical intelligence. Your child might be, you know, very good with music. There's a kinesthetic intelligence. Your child is very good with manipulations of his bodies. Your child might be very good with visual spatial intelligence. He, you know, could be a very good artist and going to be a good architect. Your child would be good interpersonal intelligence, you know. He or she is very good at handling interpersonal relationships or intrapersonal intelligence. And hopefully, all the counselors and the psychiatrists and the psychologists have strength in intrapersonal, okay? So in other words, you know, we understand more in the way of the internal process, okay? So these are the people that are not going to be big scientists, but you know, they would be good at social sciences. In other words, sciences that has to do with people. Recognize your child type of intelligence and then promote them, okay? And to promote that. Because if you have a child who is very good in terms of linguistic intelligence, and then you force your child to do the scientific things of the maths and the English and the physics, right? Your child is going to be very stressed. And it's not much point talking about psychological resilience because your child will not be resilient at all because he or she is not recognized for he or her strength and he or she doesn't have a sense of competence because he or she is going to come back with a report card that is full of D's and E's rather than the A and the B if you channel the child properly. So increasing the child's intelligence is very important, and obviously increase your child's external resources. I want to encourage parents who are here, okay? One thing about increasing the child's external resources, okay, is also to get help for the child. We live in a world where none of us is expert, okay? People who are successful in life, right? People who are successful in life recognize, I don't care whether, you know, you're a doctor, you're a psychologist, you know, you're the best doctor, or you're the scientist or whatever, right? They are the people who realize that they cannot be good at everything. So they rely on the external resources. So parents, I want to say that just because you resource externally doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. It just means that for that specific thing, there are other experts that you can call on so that you can go on to do the parenting, to enjoy the relationship with your kids, and let the experts, you know, deal with the anxiety. Okay, you deal with the anxiety, but maybe your child needs a bit more help. So getting external resources in the way of counseling, in the way of psychological help, is not a shame. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the parenting. It just means that you are calling on people who are a bit more expert than you in order to bring up the child so that you can go on to enjoy the parenting of the children. So increasing the external resources is very important. So what I have done, okay, is really to provide a bird's eye view, or rather, I've actually taken you to a textbook called Bringing Up Resilient Children and Adolescents and say, this is chapter 1, this is a heading, this is the introduction. Now let's go on to chapter 2, okay? And this is the introduction of chapter 2, and these are the things that I'm going to cover in chapter 2. And now let's go on to chapter 3, okay? So we have finished the entire book up to chapter 10. Now it's just going to be an introduction. You may need a bit more in the way of stress management for yourself and for your kids. You may need a bit more in the way of anxiety management. You may need a bit more in the way of parenting, okay? So in other words, what I've done for you is just to give you an introduction and say, let's have a look at it. Where do you think you can supplement in terms of the chapter? Do you need a bit more help in parenting? Do you need a bit more help in getting your child to understand his thought life and to really how to restructure his thought life? Do you need a bit more help in the way of emotion regulations for yourself and for your kids? And that's what merely I have done, okay? And I think this is just a beginning, and it's not going to be an end, as I say. Bringing up kids who are psychologically resilient is a lifelong thing. It's a lifelong thing. You would find that as the child grows, right, your role will be different. So initially, you're very directive with the child. But by the time, even if your child is a young adult, I hope that, okay, your relationship with your kids will be such that even when they're life adults, you become the life coach. You're no longer the person that directs them what to do, but you can actually come alongside them and say, hey, I think if you do this, you may get a better outcome, you know? And I know you've been doing this way, let me point you to something else. So the idea is a lifelong process. So the idea, the mission for parents really, the life mission of the parents, is actually bringing up children. Okay, when I say children, I don't mean chronological children. Children that are birthed from us, okay, who are psychologically resilient. And hopefully, we are just one step ahead of them, or 2 or 3 steps ahead of them, that we have something to contribute to their life. And this is just the beginning, and you may find that there are certain things that are helpful for you in this presentation. So I come to the end of that. I really, really want to thank you for this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts, and also to share with you some of my work, and to introduce to you some of my toolkits.
Any questions you want to ask? Any questions from the floor?
My question, Dr. Wong. Hi, my name is Lauren. I was wondering, does a child's resilience decrease?
Does a child's resilience decrease?
Yes, and
Yeah.
after having exhibited a relatively consistent level of resilience, will it at some point in his or her life decrease?
I would answer the questions by adding other bits to your question so that I can answer the question. If what I've said has not already confused you, then I go on to explain, okay? I think I would phrase it as the level of psychological resilience of a child may appear to decrease in the context of his environment, okay? Because, as I've shown in the slide before, when you talk about resilience, you have to think about stresses, you have to think about vulnerability. So, at a certain point in life, our children or our child may seem to be less resilient. Then you actually have to look at the environment and say what has changed in the environment. So most of the time, it's because of changes in their environment. So I hope that I've imparted to you a more dynamic concept of psychological resilience. So it's not like, so the idea of psychological resilience is not like a physical height, okay? It's not like, well, I'm 5'7", I'll be 5'7" here in Malaysia, and I'll be 5'7" in Australia, okay? It doesn't matter where I go. So it's not a static concept, okay? So the idea of psychological resilience is a dynamic concept. So your child, let's say in standard 6, may appear to be very robust. Then when he goes to Form 1 or Year 7, then his resilience may seem to have waned. Then you have to think about stresses like events, as I've shown in one of the slides. What has changed in my child's life for me to perceive that he's not coping, that his resilience is down, and usually there are certain changes. Anybody else?
I think one area of resilience when you're less capable is when bullying becomes serious at school. Then despite whatever training, it just gets too overwhelmed. So it just requires adult intervention. Yeah? So this is sort of environment we're talking about. They're constantly being bullied at school. And at some point you just give in. So as long as you teach them to talk and tell. So besides that, you have to teach them to tell. Because bullying is not okay, in Australia it's a criminal offense. It's very important to appreciate the context of the environment. Okay?